So once you've done your sheet mulching, as it is sitting, as the lawn is magically dying underneath it, you can take that time to design your new yard. And in this presentation, the way that I'm going to recommend, which is what I did, is to start with a template. You don't need to start from scratch. You don't need to start with an empty page. There are so many generous free resources that are available on the internet for you to be able to start with a template and then modify that for your needs and purposes. So these templates will offer recommended plants for what to plant in shade, what to plant in partial shade, what to plant in full sun. It gives you ideas for different styles and different aesthetics. If you want it to be a more wild look, if you want it to feel more manicured, it will support you in choosing plants that will support pollinators and be water efficient. And then with all of that kind of expertise that came from the template, you can modify that based on the plants that you're actually able to find, the size and shape of your property, and the desired outcomes. For me, I worked with Sustainable Solano and Joshua Burman Thayer with Native Sun Gardens to create a template that now we're sharing with you. So this is actually the template of what we used for my house. And ultimately, I even modified it for myself, because once I went to get some of the plants and once I actually started installing it, it seemed like there was a few things that needed to change. So that's fine. That's kind of what this is for. So you will have access to this particular template if you're interested in that. Otherwise, there are so many resources on the internet that are fantastic. And I just recommend looking at all of them. I recommend going to every one of these websites and seeing the templates that they offer, and then kind of seeing which one fits your needs and your yard the best. Then use that as your starting point. And it's important to note that while a designer can be expensive, many designers also offer consultations at a lower cost. So if you're starting with something and asking for help in modifying that, that may be more cost effective for you. It's also super helpful to learn from people who have already done that. And of course, you're doing that now by listening to me, but Sustainable Solano has an incredible resource on their website where they show you every single backyard or front yard that they have transformed in their backyard program, that you can see it, you can learn about it, and they even do a tour where you can go and see the yard yourself. And this is helpful because, you know, a plant looks different in a picture than in person. It's good to be able to see what it's really like. So if you can make it to their backyards tour, I highly recommend it. Otherwise, UC Davis also has a great resource called Life After Lawn, where residents who have made this kind of transformation tell the story of how they did that. And it's just great to see examples and to hear stories of what people did and why they made the choices that they made, what challenges they faced, how they overcome them, and ultimately how it worked out for them. So to do this modification, it does help to have some idea of design. And we're going to look at two approaches to design in this presentation that will help us with the modifications. The first is basic landscape design for function and beauty. And there is so much that you can learn about landscape design on the internet. There's thousands of books and thousands of blogs that you can read on it. So we're just going to barely scratch the surface. There's one resource that I felt was relatively simple. And for me, that was helpful, was just to see something simple, but of course, do your own research. But we'll just go over the basics here on the landscape design. And then for permaculture, that gives us the idea of how to make sure that it's sustainable and how to actually create an ecosystem. So we'll go over that today as well. We'll start with the basic landscape design principles. The first is function. And the very first thing you want to make sure you have is wheelbarrow access. a path that is wide enough for a wheelbarrow. You're going to want this in maintaining your yard. It's also good to have some walking paths because you want to interact with your yard. You want access to it. It's helpful to think about who's using the yard and what are their needs and what's going to make it most enjoyable for them. If you have kids, maybe there's some easy interactive elements that you can incorporate, like maybe you choose strawberries as a ground cover, and then the kids can come and pick them in the summer. If you have elders, you want to make sure that you have paths that are wide enough and sturdy enough for them to walk, maybe with a walker or with a wheelchair. Maybe you want to incorporate a place for them to sit. If you have animals, what are their needs? My grandma and I decided in our yard that we would keep a couple of very small patches of grass for the little doggies. That was important to her. And we had so much space to transform. It didn't seem to matter if we left a couple of patches, but what are your animals' needs? And think about how to incorporate that. And then for aesthetics, the first thing is to know your plants. Know what shape they are, know what color they are, know what size they get to be, both width and height, know what texture their leaves are, know when their blooming season is, know if they're annual or perennial. And there is an incredible resource that is free online called Calscape that is a directory of native plants in California, and you will get to know it well. It is such a tremendous resource. And if you live in any of these other Western states, I would recommend trying to see if a plant that you're interested in is listed on Calscape, because California has such amazing biodiversity that it's likely that one of the native plants in any of these Western states can be found here as well. So don't discount it if you don't live in California. I recommend still checking it out. And then as a veggie resource, the approach that I used is square foot gardening. And square foot gardening tells you how many of each veggie plant you can put within a square foot. And this is helpful. A tomato plant, for example, wants a whole square foot. It takes up a lot of room, but carrots, of course, don't. You can put 16 or something in each square foot. And that really helps you to kind of get a sense of size. And then once you have a sense of your plants, one of the things to keep in mind is that contrast helps to create focus. And in order to create that contrast, one thing that's helpful to do is to create blocks or groupings of plants rather than having one plant here and one plant there and one plant, all these single plants all over. If you do that, it can be beautiful and it can seem maybe like a rainbow of color, and it'll feel wild and it might feel like a field, but it's not going to feel designed. It's not going to feel artful necessarily. What does that is to create groupings of plants that make it easier for the eyes to focus on that plant, and then to contrast that group with a plant that has another color or another kind of texture or another size. And that allows you to see the distinction between the plants, and you can shape that in a way that has art, that feels artful, that can build a focus. For example, maybe you want to build around a bird feeder or a bird bath, or maybe you want to build around a tree. And then it's helpful to kind of create some kind of rhythm in your design where you have repeating patterns that can give it a sense of movement or coherence. One thing to know is that if you're wanting to create a more still experience, symmetry helps to create an experience of stillness, where if you want it to feel like there's more movement in the yard, asymmetry will help to create that movement. So have an idea of what it is, what kind of feeling you want to have in your yard. And then when you explore some of the landscape design principles, you can find tips that will help you to create that feeling.